Hello and welcome to Conversations in Cleantech, the podcast that celebrates the clean tech industry and the people that power it, brought to you by Brightsmith. For our 7th season, we're speaking to clean tech leaders about the process of investing in a cleaner planet. From inspiring stories and words of wisdom to financial forecast and investment insights, you can learn all about the people and companies who are driving these investments and propelling us towards a cleaner, greener tomorrow. I'm your regular host, Jenny Gladman, but this season there's a twist. I'll be taking a few months off to have my second baby, so I'm handing the reins of our podcast over to a series of fellow Brightsmithers who will be Season 7's super co-hosts. So, without further hesitation,
welcome to today's podcast. I'm today's host, Nick, and I head up our e-mobility team here at Brightsmith. Today, I'm chatting with Martin Beaumont, who's the CEO at Electric Green. Martin's an experienced board director and investor focused on EV wireless charging, clean technology, and green energy. Today, we're going to learn all about Martin's journey, his thoughts on the industry, and where it's headed. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks very much, Nick. Hope it's interesting and informative.
Well, I'm sure it will be. No problems with that. And look, before we get stuck into the industry talk, it would be great to hear your story, a bit more about you.
So what am I, 52 now? I started my career in medical devices far too long ago, focusing on product innovation and business development. Did an MBA at Cranfield, and then I worked at Motorola in telecoms infrastructure. And it was kind of there that at that time I realized I wasn't particularly happy in working in a big company environment. Too many people. It was a little bit slow, and although it was a quick time in the industry for telecoms moving into data, I wanted to do something a bit quicker. That said, it made me understand how big companies work, and in fact how powerful they can be when they get moving. So there were kind of pros and cons working in a big company for me. I then moved on and ran what was effectively a family office, where I invested in both listed and unlisted businesses. And that gave me the opportunity to get involved in some of the smaller, more innovative businesses that I enjoy working in at the moment. Those included my kind of first entry into the clean tech space, so sort of electric motors, power controllers, and some energy from waste business initiatives we were looking at. And that kind of is how I got to Electric Green, if you like. That was what I was doing before. Outside of work, I got a fantastic fiance, Emma, who I'm going to have to name check, otherwise she'll give me some stick when I get home. We got 4 amazing boys between us, aged 12 to 16, so that keeps us pretty busy. I live in southwest London, and I sort of like a bit of adventure. So outside work, I've rowed from Ireland to Wales a few times, and I've rowed the Atlantic. So I like having a crack at some new things.
Blimey, rowing the Atlantic. That's a hell of a journey.
Yeah, it's not like playing Friday Night Fives for an hour, put it like that, Nick. It's a little bit more involved, but I guess that's probably the topic of a whole other podcast, frankly.
I can imagine, and that's something we could get stuck on for a while, but especially keen to hear more about Electric Green. Obviously, really interesting company. And what you're doing is fascinating. So love to hear more about your role there and what the company is doing.
So I run Electric Green. We founded it about 2 years ago. It's a subsidiary of a company called Enertechnos in southwest London as well. Our industry sector, if you like, is decarbonisation and the transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. We think that we developed what's called static wireless charging technology. And this enables vehicles to charge across an air gap. So it's a little bit like how your toothbrush charges, but with a gap in the middle. So it's called inductive or wireless charging. The ground pad forms a magnetic field which goes across the gap. That magnetic field is picked up by a vehicle pad and in turn reconverted back into power and fed into the battery. And we think this is the future of EV charging. If I can just give you a bit of sort of color around that statement, Nick. Up to now, most electrification has happened by plugging in the vehicle. And our view is it's kind of okay, but it just could be so much better. Plugging in, it's a bit of a faff. You've got the trip hazard. It doesn't work for people with mobility issues. It doesn't work for taxis, ambulances in an area that we refer to as opportunity charging. And when you plug in, you generally can't go about your everyday business. The act of charging becomes a thing in itself. And what wireless charging enables you to do is embed the charging process into your everyday activities. So it's not even something you have to think about. Now, the problem with wireless historically is it's always been too expensive. Nobody's ever said, oh, blimey, this is just much too easy and simple to use. I'm loving the consumer experience, but I'd rather plug in. That's not something you'll hear very much. But what you will hear is, I really like wireless charging, but it's just too expensive. And so we are really focused on driving down the cost of integrating wireless into the vehicles, but also driving down the cost of on a per pad basis for the charging infrastructure, so that fleet operators, private car owners, car hire companies, leasing companies, etc., can get infrastructure out there at the lowest cost possible. And the way we make vehicles more affordable is that we have changed the architecture on the ground side. So instead of having a one-to-one relationship between the charger and the ground pad, we are able to distribute the 85 kilohertz frequency that is used in wireless power transfer over long distance. And that means we can put the charger in the corner of the depot, at the end of the street, round the corner, out of the way. We have a backbone cable made of CTS, very innovative cabling system we've developed, and then we put multiple charge pads on top of that. So the competition are only able to send 85 kilohertz approximately 6 meters, so they're stuck with this linear cost relationship of one charger, one pad, one charger, one pad. And we are centralizing those activities and driving down the cost. And that is what we think will make wireless appeal to the mass market. The other element we're doing is we're adding bidirectionality into our products. As power requirements grow and most vehicles are not used throughout the whole of the day, there is a storage, if you like, of power in the vehicles, and that can then be fed back into the grid at peak time. And we think particularly wireless will help in that area, because if you are 80% charged or you're only stopping for an hour, you're probably not going to bother to plug in because it's just a bit of a hassle. Whereas if all you've got to do is press the button on the app, the car connects, the availability of that battery asset is much easier to access than if you were plugging in. So we think wireless will play a crucial part in the uptake of bidirectionality. You're already seeing talks about making bidirectionality mandatory. California, I believe, are looking at making it mandatory by 2026, in which case Tesla will make bidirectionality standard, in which case the rest of the market will adopt it pretty quickly. So that's one of the other innovations that we're implementing.
It's all super interesting stuff, and I know we've spoken before about is it wireless being the future. You can just look at past industry or past technologies. Wireless home internet. People wouldn't go back to wired home internet, so it's a natural evolution of EV charging, and really interesting to see Electric Green at the forefront of that, bringing the real innovation.
Exactly, Nick. There are great examples of how consumers buy into wireless, right? Nobody's plugging their laptop into with an Ethernet cable. Nobody's getting up off their backside to change the channel because they've got a remote. Nobody's walking around the kitchen with a telephone and a massive cord coming out behind them. Where wireless is available, consumers will adopt it. The key here is about integrating it into the devices and providing it cost effectively.
Exactly, and with all of that in mind, what have been the biggest achievements of Electric Green so far?
We've come a heck of a long way with limited resources, I think, at Electric Green. We've set the strategy. We've said our focus is going to be on lowest cost, and we are starting to deliver that. Building a team has been a big achievement. Getting the right people into the business. It's not always easy when you're a startup to attract the right caliber of person. We've managed to do that. We've got some really, really capable people in the business. Selling the vision and what we're able to do and what we're trying to achieve has really helped with that. We've also built up a great ecosystem of partners. We recognize that we can't do everything ourselves. And so making sure that we're working with kind of best in class partners is really important. I can't mention them for confidentiality reasons on this podcast, but if they're watching it, Everybody out there, you know who you are, and thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for helping us. But we've gone from being a relatively unknown company to getting ourselves on the map. We've won an Innovate UK grant to demonstrate wireless charging with Royal Mail, which is fantastic. We're on the map. We're being approached by OEMs to take part in RFQs. From a standstill to be able to get to that position within 2 years, I'm very proud of what we've done, frankly. And Tesla, we now know, are going to bring out a wireless product on their truck, and wireless is coming. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, matter of when, not if, and no doubt you're positioned really well to take the lead in the forefront of the adoption of that in the UK.
That's where I've got to put us, Nick. Yeah, exactly.
No doubt it's not all been sunshine and rainbows along the way, though. What challenges have you had to deal with?
Oh gosh. Well, that alone, that could be another podcast as well, quite frankly. I mean, look, we've faced a lot of challenges, like all businesses, some internal, some external. When you're trying to deliver innovation and invention, it's not a straight line, and what you think is going to happen doesn't always happen. It often costs a lot more than you thought it was going to do, and takes you a lot longer. So work in an environment where you don't necessarily know exactly what's around the corner. Investment is difficult. I know we're going to talk a lot more about investment in the latter part of this podcast, but being well funded, you've got to be well funded. You've got to have a decent runway ahead of you to enable you to deliver what you want, because you have to commit to things, and you need staff that understand that you've got resources as well. So that's tricky. That's not always easy. Recruitment is difficult. Just finding the right engineers, for instance. I'm the only non-engineer in our company, so I sort of position myself as having enough to bluff, if you like, in the engineering field. But I've access to lots of people who know all of the difficult answers. And engineering at the moment demand is outstripping supply. And particularly if you want a diverse engineering workforce, that is extremely tricky. So I would say that's one of the biggest issues we face. Other things is probably stakeholder management. There are lots of people that we have to interact with, where, if you like, dealing with government legislation, we are affected by government legislation. We are dealing with OEMs, vehicle makers, very big organizations. Things don't happen very quickly. We're dealing with, potentially in the future, putting in charging infrastructure. All of these things take a long time. So there's a lot of balls in the air, I would say, and there are issues with all of them.
I think a lot of these are also really common challenges faced amongst the sector, because it's such a young sector. There's no real set guideline of how to deal with with everything. Like you say, when it comes to government legislation, that sort of thing, it's all still being developed.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen government legislation change. For instance, the Conservative government have just pushed back or just recently pushed back the ban on non-EV and hybrids from 2030 to 2035. That if you're a CPO and you've got a business model based on an EV adoption rate of X, and suddenly it's X minus 5 years, that's going to have a big impact, and it doesn't help for confidence in the industry and investment. So yeah, those kind of things they don't help, but they're not unique to Electric Green. They're across the board in the UK.
Naturally, and within the sector as a whole, I think it's clear how dynamic it can be, how fast changing and fast moving, and you need to be so quick to keep up with everything. And what inspired you to work in such a sector?
I think there are huge opportunities in the clean tech sector. When we approach 2050 and we try and achieve net zero, there are so many different areas that need help. And so there are lots of new technologies that are being developed and new businesses that are springing up. So you've got plenty of places to look and plenty of options. The thing I particularly liked about Electric Green is I love the idea of wireless technology. For me, in the future, it's just a no-brainer. If it works and if we can bring it to market, which we are doing, then why on earth would anybody plug in? And you are going to enable a mass transition and facilitate a mass transition from ICE to EV. So I'm really pleased to be part of that. And from a company point of view, I love a blank bit of paper where they say you got to get from A to B, you work out how to do it. It's an enormous challenge. I'm quite creative. I'm inquisitive. as I get older, I find I'm in a little bit more of a hurry than I used to be. I want to get things done. And the situation I'm in has given me the opportunity to do all of that and to continue doing it. But we're only 2 years into it. There's a long way to go. And I think this is, to use the hackneyed expression, this is definitely a marathon, not a sprint.
And it's always going to be the case. And while it is early days, like you said, 2 years in, I'm sure there's lessons that you've learned along the way that you could share with people who are shaping their journeys in the sector.
So in terms of things that I've learned, Nick, there's lots of opportunities, and with that comes multiple businesses you can look at, and they're not all going to be winners. You're unfortunately far more likely to fail than be successful in this area, and you've got to be prepared to learn things aren't always going to go your way. And once you're in a business in this area, you've just got to keep going. As I said, it's not a straight line developing what we're doing. You encounter problems on a weekly basis, and it's interesting. My rowing background, when we rowed the Atlantic in 40 days, and there were 3 of us on a 7-meter boat. And when you're the only person rowing in the middle of the night and you're attached by a thin rope and a belt around your waist, and you're worried about getting knocked off the side and there's a lightning storm running parallel to you, you just keep going. And I don't want to over dramatize it too much, but when things get tough, just get your head down and keep going. And tomorrow's another day. And what feels awful at the moment won't be going forward. I would also advise people to be a great networker, because in this area there are lots of people coming into the sector who were never in it before, people who might be able to help you that you weren't expecting, and put your hand up, go out and meet those people. And then I guess lastly, I'd say, don't think you know it all. It's very easy for people to bamboozle you with technology that on the face of it sounds fantastic, but perhaps isn't so great or isn't destined for success. So I think seek expert advice on decisions you make and do your own due diligence.
Amazing. I think always being curious is such an important point. Asking the right questions to the right people and making sure that you're up to date with what's going on elsewhere. And most importantly, I think the resilience piece brings us very nicely onto what is the theme, as you alluded to earlier, of the podcast this season of investment, which is obviously a tricky world at the moment. So it'd be interesting to learn your thoughts on how the investment in the sector looks at the moment.
Yeah, Nick, I mean, look, investment is always difficult, but it's incredibly necessary. And I think up to now, there's been quite a lot of government and legislative backing to help get the transition started. But the transition to net zero is massive, and it's going to need help for quite some time to change old habits. On a macro level, probably anywhere between 8 and 5 years ago, there was a big pile into ESG investing, and companies were falling over themselves to invest. And certainly in the last 2 years, that has changed dramatically. I think there's a number of reasons for that. Interest rates going up has been a major one. Greenwashing is another factor at play that is not helpful, where people have made claims that perhaps aren't as honest as they could be. A little bit like AI now. Everybody's into AI now, aren't they? Everything's AI. And if 2 years ago we reached peak ESG, and I think now people are looking at businesses and going, are the fundamentals still there in the business? Never mind how it's branded. So regardless of what sector you're in, your business has to be strong and have a future. So I think those kind of things have made it more difficult. Being green is not a golden ticket to success. You've still got to deliver. But I think the investment community are coming back to a kind of equilibrium. They've all piled in. Things haven't happened as quickly as they thought. We've reached peak ESG. It's come back again. And I would hope that over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to get back to a more balanced picture. And there will be some more investment flowing into the sector.
Yeah, exactly. And it brings me nicely onto my next question of how you see it changing in the coming years, which obviously sounds a bit optimistic on your side.
More optimistic than I have been. I'm not going to say I'm super optimistic about funding being available on tap for everybody. But I think people are still going to be circumspect. I think they're going to have more level of scrutiny, a higher level of scrutiny than they would have done 5 years ago. And you're going to see less grant backing for businesses, probably, and less government support. And the businesses will have to stand on their own 2 feet. I mean, in the area we work in vehicle electrification, as technologies become more mature, you see more standardization. You start with lots of technologies all competing for a place in the market, and some of those get stronger, some fall away. Or clearly, we want wireless charging to be one of those 1 or 2 that are adopted. If I can use the ICE analogy, the petrol or the diesel equivalent of charging your vehicle going forward. And what tends to happen is once the standard has been chosen, then scale can come quite quickly because it de-risks the investment. So it's always easy to find investor number 2. So it's never easy to find the lead investor. The market's full of followers. But once you do prove something, then there's a lot of money to scale it. And I think even some of the plug-in charging guys are finding that at the moment. I think that will happen, but also I think ultimately OEMs won't support multiple solutions. They want economies of scale. They want to reduce customization, press a button and go, right, here's 1 million units in the next 6 months, not 100,000 of this one, 100,000 of that one, etc. That's not how they make money. Margins are very slim. So I think there's going to be a kind of shaking out of some of the new stuff, and as standards are adopted, the proliferation of those will increase quite quickly.
It's really interesting, and especially about how much scrutiny there is on initial investment at the moment. It's obviously so key to get that right, given what the limited funds are out there at the moment. How's your experience been when seeking investment for Electric Green?
I think it's hard work, to be honest, but it helps to have a supportive board who give you time and funding and are patient, because you can't always deliver what you want to on time. The flip side of all of this is that it really makes you focus on what's important in your business, and it forces you to re-examine things in your business plan, and you focus on value creation much more. And for us, that's a better balance of hardware and software revenues, for instance. But ultimately, if your strategy and execution are strong and you're connecting with the right kind of funders, then I believe you will be successful. But venture businesses need to talk to venture companies, and cash flow positive growing businesses need to talk to PE companies. It's about matching both sides of the table.
Yeah, and hitting the right expectations on what the company should be seeking in the first place.
Yeah, most definitely, in terms of quantum and in terms of timing of that money as well.
Exactly. And with all that in mind, what advice can you give to anyone listening, people or companies who are in the process of seeking investment for themselves?
Well, in terms of advice for somebody seeking funding, I mean, there's a number of bits of advice I would pass on. It always takes longer than you think, and you need to be prepared, because once you find somebody who's interested, you've got to present yourself in the best light possible. You need to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. So don't leave it too late, because you'll have run out of money, and then you'll just have to accept potentially a suboptimal outcome in terms of the funding negotiation. On the be prepared side, get your virtual data room ready, get it peer reviewed, because sometimes you've been head down at the coalface for so long you can't see the wood for the trees, and it's always useful to get third party review of what you're presenting. Lastly, I think make sure you've got proof points of what you're trying to do. Start small and then scale. Don't try and do too much too quickly. So you want demonstrators, you want a roadmap. Hey, revenues are always helpful, and thereafter sell the vision of how big the business could be, because ultimately that's what people want to invest in. But don't be under any illusions. Don't try and oversell yourself, but just have a well thought through route to mass revenue, and see if people want to invest and join you on the journey. And I would also add to that, don't underestimate the value of a strategic investor. Potentially you won't get as good a financial deal as you thought you would from somebody else, but you will get massive amount of assistance, credibility, access to testing equipment, customers, etc. So they are very, very useful strategic investors.
A lot of really interesting points there, and really, really keen to hear where we move on from here in the EV market as a whole. I think we're discussing a lot on the podcast how you think the market will develop, not from an investment perspective, but from a competitor perspective, who's going to be the key players, that sort of thing. What's your take on the state of the market, especially in terms of sort of the challenges and the opportunities?
I think, if I'm honest, I think the market's in a bit of a state of flux at the moment. I'm not one for studying the data in too much detail, but from what I can pick up on, there's a bit of a seesaw on the balance of supply and demand on vehicles here. Obviously, it varies by geography as well. But when you've got tax incentives, salary sacrifice, that type of thing, charging infrastructure incentives as well, it makes it easier for the early adopters to buy into the technology and the equipment. The early adopters, I think, now have bought the vehicles. They've probably got above average income. They almost certainly have access to off-street parking. So, charging is much easier for those kind of consumers. But that leaves out a massive area of the market. And you've probably seen, I think now, a bit of a slowing down of demand as OEMs try and sell vehicles to the early majority. That, for instance, is not helped by changing dates from the UK government, as we alluded to earlier. People can put off that decision, and where they're not sure, they'll stick with what they know, which isn't necessarily an EV at the moment. And then you've got EVs are expensive, right? They've got big batteries in. Everybody's a little bit obsessed by range, and that means the battery's got to be bigger. The battery makes up about half the cost of the vehicle. And there's uncertainty about residual prices of used vehicles. Not everybody buys a brand new car, so can take advantage of salary sacrifice. So there's an awful lot of reasons why somebody might want to just wait and see what happens. And I think just because OEMs are being forced to transition to manufacturing electric or hybrid vehicles, it doesn't mean people want to buy them. If costs are too high, the charging infrastructure isn't right, people will either say, I'll look at alternative transport, which ultimately is good for net zero, not knocking that at all, or they'll say, well, I'll hang on to my vehicle for another couple of years. It's kind of quite perverse, really, that one of the things that drives an element of net zero is a salary sacrifice leased vehicle, which a lot of people are going to change after 3 years. You really don't need to, right? You could keep that vehicle for 5-7 years. So there's a little bit of a paradox there. And then lastly, I think grid response is a big issue as well. You make the EVs, but you've also got to charge them. And this is not new news, but the grid is not in the right place at the right time at the moment for charge point operators or depots, and they are struggling with the cost to upgrade. For instance, at the moment on our Innovate UK project with Royal Mail, we're putting a 10-pad system in the Kingston depot. We don't yet know the precise cost of this substation upgrade, but it's anywhere from £50,000 to £250,000 for one depot. That's a huge amount. We may be unlucky in where we are, and other areas don't need to have that level of investment, but that's what some people are facing. So there's got to be a better way of the grid reacting, and a cheaper way.
Two really key issues there that I see come up a lot, and without having to ask you to look into your crystal ball, how do you see those issues changing over the next few years, and what part will electric green play?
Hopefully an enormous part. I think as charging infrastructure becomes more ubiquitous, I think range will become less of a thing. Range anxiety, battery technology will improve. But I think what you'll find is, there'll be a more focus on cost for consumers. At the moment, you've got generally above average income people having electric vehicles. They're more worried about, can I find the power, not what does the power cost? And I think anybody on street is unfairly penalised with the VAT differential between off-street and on-street parking. That has got to change. But consumers will be more price sensitive anyway. It's particularly as the adoption rate increases. And less affluent consumers are driving EVs. They're going to be more focused on the cost. So this is going to mean that, again, there'll be even more emphasis on low-cost infrastructure. And our one-to-many architecture at Electric Green is what we're really focusing on. Because in order for any technology to be adopted, it's got to be manufactured at scale. And that means having standard parts fitted on vehicles. And our biggest challenge and initiative at the moment is talking to OEMs and looking at programs whereby cars come out of the factory wirelessly ready, a bit like HDMI on your TV. The consumer then has the option of saying, right, I want to stick with the plug-in, or please add on the wireless opportunity for me. And that makes the pathway to mass wireless charging adoption that much easier. Now, to do that, it has to happen at scale for that to be affordable. So that's what we're working on. OEMs are telling us that is what they're very, very interested in doing. I think plug-in is hopefully just a stopgap on the way to wireless, a wireless way of charging your vehicle. The other thing about wireless is it's going to enable opportunity charging for mass markets. So when you go into the supermarket for 15 minutes, you'll be able to get a top up. And if you can get top-ups in enough places, again, back to the battery argument, you don't need such a big battery. It's a little bit like the mobile phone analogy. Most people just plug in their phone when they get to their desk or they get in their car. They don't generally run it from 100 to 0. They top it up. And therefore, it doesn't matter that it might not be the fastest charge in town. It's an available charge, and it gives you enough to get from A to B. And we think the same thing will happen with car batteries. So drive to the railway station, leave your car for 8 hours, you have a long dwell time, so you don't need the quickest charger in town because you're coming back 8 hours later. It's totally ample. And if that can give you your 20-mile range to the station and 20 miles back, you're able to maintain your battery charge along the way. The other thing that is going to evolve massively is, as I said earlier, is V2G. And I think right now, people estimate that potentially, depending on who you read, vehicles could generate anywhere from £300 to £1,000 in revenue for the vehicle owner by selling power back to the grid. That's quite compelling over the lifetime of a vehicle. And more cars are looking to be bi-directional. And now at the same time, we need the charging infrastructure to keep pace with that so that it can also work to feed back the power. So yeah, I guess that's a summary. In summary, Nick, lots of different areas are going to change, really.
Absolutely, and so much for us to keep an eye on. That we're really interested to see how things develop, and no doubt we'll see continuing positive news, positive updates from here on out. And look, coming towards the end now, the last question we always ask guests on the podcast is for their Cleantech token of wisdom. So for people looking to enter the industry, what advice can you offer for success?
Well, I've been thinking about the answer to this, Nick, because there isn't a standard answer, I think. I guess all of the people you interview probably have a different view of it. When I was thinking about this, I came back to just get yourself out there is the best way to do it. Get involved in the sector. Go to trade shows, go to conferences, network like crazy, and speak to as many people as you can. Not specific to this sector, but organize a coffee with somebody. If they can't help you, I'm sure they know somebody else who can. Get yourself some training, understand the trends, and speak to great recruiters. I'm sure you can think of one.
I could think of at least one.
Yeah,
not going to name any names. But look, well, all really good points, and look, appreciate all of that, Martin, and no doubt good advice. And really, that brings us to the end. That's all we've got time for on this episode. But thanks so much, Martin, for a really insightful chat. Really interested to see where Electric Green go for here, and thanks for being a great guest.
Pleasure, Nick. Many thanks for having me.